Hacktoberfest. We have some, I'm going to share my slides. Some guests here with us today. We have Keith Lewis and Cal Corbin, who have been helping people out when it comes to Hacktoberfest in our Slack channel, Hacktoberfest. There's also one called Get Help, GIT-HELP. We have Alex in the streaming, and Chris is here to answer questions too. And then my name is Kimberly Collins, but I didn't already say that. Alex, Chris, and I are leading the group, and then Cal and Keith are here to help us out. So let's start talking about Hacktoberfest. The first question you probably have, if you haven't heard of it, is what is Hacktoberfest? It's basically a challenge to create 4 pull requests on GitHub during this month of October. And so they've been doing this every year for the past few years. It was kind of crazy last year, so it's a little bit more restricted this year. The first 55,000 people to participate can earn a t-shirt. If you haven't signed up yet, go to hacktoberfest.digitalocean.com. Sign up and you can read all about it. There are a lot of great resources on that website. And Cal, Keith, Chris, jump in on any of these slides with anything you want to add. Anything you want to add about how you would explain what Hacktoberfest is?
I don't think they're anywhere close to 55,000 yet. So
okay, that's good to know, because I was wondering,
to get a shirt.
Don't need to hurry up. And I got my 4 done. Cal, you have your 4 done. Keith, Chris?
I got my 4 done because I was
not halfway.
Yeah. Well, we're a third of the way through the month, so just be aware that you do have limited time to get these done. And so if you have ever created a pull request, you might be wondering, what is that exactly? What am I requesting from who? What is this polling we're talking about? This is an action that you take on GitHub when you want someone to pull changes that you've made to their stuff into their code. So it can be a little confusing at first. You think you're pushing your changes, but really on GitHub, the idea is that you're asking someone to pull the changes you made into their repository. Again, feel free to jump in if there's any, tangential question, and feel free to type your questions on the Twitch chat or in Slack, and we'll answer them. So far, we don't have any, but definitely please, y'all on the call and people watching, jump in with your questions and answers. So if you don't have a GitHub account, definitely go create one right now. Again, we have in Slack the channel called Get Help, and so that'll be open year-round for anyone to ask questions about Git and GitHub. But then we do have the specific Hacktoberfest Slack channel, and that's where you can go, and people like Cal and Keith can help you out if you have any trouble at all. So go create a GitHub account if you don't have one. And so I think that the first big question is, okay, I've never created pull requests before. How exactly do I do that? And I'm going to go look for the YouTube video that I want to share while y'all talk more about this. Like Cal, Keith, Chris, we've got some alliteration today. What would you say to someone who has never created a pull request before? How do they even start?
I'd say dive in. With this kind of thing, you can read about pull requests over and over, but sometimes you have to just dive in. Maybe you'll get rejected, but it's really just getting in there and doing it and familiarizing yourself and taking away any sort of scariness or mystique to it. Definitely just dive in, write some code changes first, but otherwise get in there, create the pull request. It's always going to be a little different with open source. So you don't always know who's going to be on the other end, but there's a lot of information usually on GitHub repos where you can read about that and learn what they expect of you in those pull requests. So
exactly. And I'd say, I want to say like 90 to 95% of the people that you will interact with on a pull request or in a repo are more than excited for you to be there. Because usually open source doesn't have a lot of help, so any help is usually appreciated. There are a small segment of the open source community that are not welcoming. I say that to caution you not to let that dissuade you if you run into them. They are a small minority, but they do exist. So,
yeah, great point. I'm glad you mentioned that. But overall, I think that I'm going to switch to this tab channel. One of the first ones I'd really recommend is you find this one, Learning Pull Requests on GitHub from Casey Kelch. She gave another one about the difference between Git and GitHub, because that can be confusing when you're very first starting. Like, what does it even mean? Any talk by Casey is going to be good. And then the open source software channel has a few more that you can go check out and hopefully it doesn't start playing. But definitely this one I think is a great one to start with. That link in the Twitch chat.
Yeah, it actually threw me off at the beginning of Hacktoberfest because I'm used to doing pull requests directly in repos that I'm a member of, and I forgot what it was like to actually fork a repo and have to have my changes accepted. So I learned something new with this one just because I haven't done that in ages. So just having my own forked repo and then doing a pull request was its own little fun experience. That
it's a challenge.
Yeah. Plus, it means you can play around with the code in your own repo. So if you want to just break all the code, you can do that too.
Yes. And something I think that you
doesn't mean they'll accept it.
Right. That's what I was going to get. I think you asked something about like, should I create an issue first, or should I find an issue, or should I just do it? It's like, okay, but be aware that your changes might not be accepted. They might not be accepted for Hacktoberfest specifically, or just in general. You might create a pull request and you're asking, you're requesting something, and the answer can be no. So either the maintainer is too busy or has gotten off to other things in life, or they just don't really feel like your change fits in well for whatever reason. So just be aware that you might work really hard on something and it not be accepted. So definitely
that happened to me.
Be prepared for that.
So,
did it?
Yes, I was working on a bug for the Atom IDE, and I got my local environment up. I fixed the bug locally. Somebody else fixed it way before me. And what that taught me was, one, it's still good to actually get a local environment up and running, but that's an entirely different skill set kind of outside of Hacktoberfest. I think really you want to just see if you can fix the bug, maybe not spend too much time familiarizing yourself with the open source beyond reproducing the bug or the issue or just the documentation. But really just kind of focus on what can I do that would be useful to them. Kind of like chores stuff, because a lot of these people, at least when I was talking, one of the groups I was talking to was an Australian open source community. They just didn't have time to update their documentation and update some of their testing. So that's actually what I did for them. So it didn't really require me to do too much setup on my end. I really just had to make my changes, test them pretty quickly locally, and see if it works in their repo. Because they had a bunch of CI/CD, which is continuous integration and continuous deployment. And that actually was what was hard about my pull request, was getting my tests to pass into their repo. So that was a fun experience, which I learned. I learned some GitHub actions, learned some GitHub workflows, which part of the point of doing a Hacktoberfest is learning too. So yeah.
It sounds like you learned a lot. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, it is fun. Especially working with people where it's the opposite time of day that you were. So, because I think I would make changes when it was 3:30 in the morning for them generally. So I didn't get much feedback until the next day.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, I can show you that pull request later on. Let's show you guys what CI/CD looks like for an open source repo.
Yeah, let's get into that later. I want to go through a little bit more of this basic stuff first, because that sounds like it could be a little intimidating.
No, I may not go too deep into it. I don't want to scare people away.
And do remember that after the stream is over, we'll be opening this up. And like Chris mentioned, I think before the stream started, we can have like breakout rooms if you really want to get deep into what Cal worked on. You can do that. Or Keith, do you have anything that you want to add along these lines?
No.
Okay, totally fine. I do want to talk about this slide here about, even if you're not totally into coding yet, if you're just getting started, what Cal talked about is documentation is huge, and especially the people who are too busy with the code to do a good job of the documentation, or are so familiar with the code that it's hard to write documentation because you don't have that new perspective that beginners can bring. So definitely don't feel like you can't do this because you don't have a lot of experience. I think Cal did a few where it was just a table of contents for the README. That's just Markdown. And we do have a few. I think I can share this tab on our GitHub for freeCodeCamp. We've never renamed it from OKC to Techlahoma, but Hacktoberfest project ideas. So you could edit this file. We have a few other repos that are just Markdown. Like they're just intended to be for new people who don't quite feel comfortable with coding, but could do some Markdown. So check these out. This is the type of text you'll be editing. So definitely not scary at all. We have a few of those type of repos specifically for people to get more comfortable with Markdown and pull requests, but also to be sharing helpful information. Like we don't want to see people just adding here or like spaces or like change unless it's a good punctuation change. Like feel free to actually correct things, but don't go crazy just adding stuff to be adding stuff. Like we want to see things that are helpful too. So I think the big problem that people have is finding time to work on this. Do any of the three of y'all have tips on how to find time to get these things done, or are y'all here for those tips also?
I think I'm here for those tips partly. I only have one done so far. I think personally it's what you have on the slide there is scheduling some time to like kind of work on it, especially with other people who are also trying to get some work done and can get in the same mindset, help each other out while you're working on stuff. I think that's probably the most helpful for me.
Yeah, Cal, how did you get yours done so quick?
That's exactly what I did. I put 2 25-minute blocks on my Google Calendar for the weekend. And when I got to those 25-minute blocks, I turned off my phone. I turned off Slack.
Yep.
Turned off all the distractions. I was only in GitHub. That's it.
Nice. Yeah, and I think what Chris's point was also like, if you want, a buddy to work on this with you, or just like having that time, like, okay, let's meet at this time on this day. Like, you don't want to let that person down. So we can schedule calls just like this one. Open up your code that you're working on. Let's work on it together. Let's get it done. We used to have these coffee and code meetups at coffee shops. At least in Oklahoma City, we did. That's probably not going to be happening again super soon, but we can virtually. So in our Hacktoberfest channel, if you're like, hey, I could just really use like 25 minutes of somebody's time to help me get this done, great, let's do it. Just let us know. That's all that it really takes, is saying, hey, I could really use some help on this. I already showed this link, and I'll share it in the chat also. And I think, how many more slides do I have on this? Not very many. So I think next might be Keith's answer to this question of like, how do I actually find the things to work on? I showed you all the Hacktoberfest project ideas, a few other repos under freeCodeCamp OKC on GitHub. We've posted a couple. I think they're pinned in our Slack channel, in the Hacktoberfest channel. And then Jake Fellwalk shared some resources from Hacktober, or from DigitalOcean, I guess, on how to find these. And so I think with this, I will, Keith, do you want to, or Cal, either one, or you want to show your screen or talk about this for a minute, like how to, like, okay, I'm ready, I'm excited, I'm ready to go create one. Okay, where literally do I go? Other than going to hacktoberfest.digitalocean.com to actually sign up to get your credit, and it'll track the status of your PRs. If you're not on our Slack channel already, definitely do that. Join us at slack.techlahoma.org. Again, Git help is going to be there year-round for help with Git, and then Hacktoberfest specifically for this. So I think with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let one of y'all take over.
Okay.
I'll defer to you, Keith.
Okay, yeah. A couple years ago, I actually went through this when I went through my first Hacktoberfest, and I spent probably a good 30 minutes or hour cataloging a couple requests that I'd want to do. There weren't a lot of resources then on finding PRs. It wasn't exceptionally well documented as to what might be good stuff, I just started noticing some patterns between issues that I saw on GitHub and started notating down those patterns. And that kind of led to a tweet I sent out 2 years ago that contained the GitHub shortcuts to do the search for these Hacktoberfest searches. These are basically just a manifestation of that. That a couple of the searches in that tweet. There's some Microsoft specific ones for Hacktoberfest that I can't put in here because of limitations in the GitHub SDK for developers. It can't do multi-repo searching, which stinks, but Microsoft doesn't have an overarching organization. They put all of their stuff in different houses. So a lot of their stuff is spread out over like 20 or 30 different things. So you can't just centralize it. But that led me to this year, I kind of lit a fire and decided to create this site to give us a little boost, help finding PR issues or finding issues to PR. Log in with GitHub. I require you to log in because otherwise the site will go down after a while. GitHub limits the number of requests that can be made with an unauthenticated app. And so prevent that, I have the user sign in. And then it's just as simple as, picking either just general Hacktoberfest issues, which combines these two and ones that aren't labeled with extra labels. And then the easy issues or ones that are labeled as good first issues, which are usually the easiest issues in my experience. But once you click that, it'll take a second and then, whoops, I need to found a bug. Then it's just you find an issue in here, click on it, and it will take you to GitHub and the issue with it. Some of them are in different languages, but and if you have a preference in programming language, you can select that here, and it will take that into account on your search. This list is programmatically generated from GitHub's list of languages, so some of them aren't as user-friendly or may not be exactly what you're looking for because it's formatted slightly differently because of special characters or whatnot. Like C++, for instance, is literally C++, the word C++, because that's what GitHub calls it internally. C# is, instead of the sharp icon, the hashtag, it's C#. But otherwise, it's pretty easy. Once you do that, you can then reload, and all of these issues will be repos that primarily use C# in this instance. Yeah, if you go here, you can see that they're using C#. all of these are participating repos. They're tagged with the Hacktoberfest tag. So they will count toward your, or should count towards your PRs for the month without any issue. If they don't, obviously contact DigitalOcean, or figure out why, troubleshoot with them why the PRs aren't showing up. Sometimes there's a slight delay on PRs showing up. There's like a 15-minute delay if you refresh the page. Otherwise, it's a couple hours, I think, that it refreshes. But other than that, there are hundreds of issues for any language. So we have a lot of repos participating this year. So
I also posted in the Twitch chat a link to the repo for this. If people have some
yes, if
things
you
like
have,
maybe documentation.
I need to mess with the Z index on this footer because apparently I messed that up in my last poll.
Well, there you go. Somebody can help out with that. So kind of meta here, but totally acceptable. I think, Chris, you created a PR for this, didn't you?
Yeah.
Well, I thought I did, but I do see a scroll bar at the bottom of the window.
Yeah.
It may or may not fixed it.
It may or may not have. It fixed a big issue that I was having, actually, which is if you view this on mobile, it didn't flow correctly into the single column view, which it now does nicely.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it on my side, so might just be something with the zoom level.
Yeah, I don't know.
Looks good though.
Yeah, did some great work on this.
Yeah, it looks great. It's like really easy to use. Gives me an overabundance of issues to go through.
Yeah, I think the problem is not finding any issue; it's finding like an easy issue or a straightforward issue that's to your skills. Like, okay, great, these are in a technology or stack that I'm not as familiar with. So I think that when people say I can't find issues to work on, it's like, well, I can't find easy issues to work on.
Right.
I hope that those 3 searches you had help narrow that down at least a little bit.
And
I definitely go back to documentation, like the one you've got your cursor on right now. Add documentation.
Yeah, I was going to say a lot of like Cal was saying earlier, a lot of these good first issues. What I had noticed years ago and now it hasn't really changed, but a lot of them tend to focus around documentation. If nothing else, it gets you familiar with the repo and with what they're expecting in their pull requests. So, but yeah, a lot of these are just documentation changes. So they're quick, easy. A lot of these are changes that you could probably knock out in half an hour easy. So
that's great. Appreciate you making this site and sharing it with us today. Looking for questions from the audience about okay, what's keeping you from getting these 4 pull requests done? Definitely go to this myfirstpr.com. Ask Keith any questions in Slack that you have about this. Any more tips y'all want to give on well, how do I which one should I do for that overabundance of issues? Any tips on finding that good very first one?
I do have an example of a first one you can do if pull requests are scary. I can show that real quick.
I forgot.
Is it the haiku one? Because you should totally share that.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to share.
Perfect.
All right, I'll take it from you, Keith. Okay. Let's say cookie. All right. So this one is actually maintained by DigitalOcean, and this one, DigitalOcean wants this to be the repo that you can create your first PR on and have it count, because they understand the frustration of the past few years where people were doing white space changes or adding a space in a PR. But they also didn't want to close it off to everybody and make it so hard and so intimidating that you couldn't make a pull request. So this one's actually a really good practice. So if you go to GitHub/do community Cloud Haiku, go here, check out some of these pull requests here. And then let's go to, we'll take some look at what's closed or what's been accepted. And looks like some people got some invalid ones. I'm curious what they did. But let's look at this one. My first Hacktoberfest PR merged 2 hours ago. And this will count, by the way. So if you're just needing an extra one, check this out. Or needing to hit that number for. What they're doing is they fork it. So they forked it. They have their own repo over here. And then they're going to merge it over here into the main branch of the DigitalOcean repo. But all they're doing here is and it's Markdown, by the way. So it's a good chance to learn Markdown. They're just creating a little haiku. So I believe this actually has a CI/CD in it, continuous integration, that will count the number of syllables in your haiku. So just a heads up, make sure it's a real haiku. But let's see, the thing starts today, Hacktoberfest number 8. First one for me, yay. So this is actually, I think this is cool because you're actually doing Markdown. You're not just doing little hacks around spacing or a typo or making typos. But I thought this was cool. And I don't see any tests for syllables. So maybe you don't have to do that. Or maybe you should still count your syllables. But yeah, see? And you have the DigitalOcean person there saying, thank you for the haiku and contributing to open source. So this one is a really good way to just dive in and get your first one or get your fourth one if you're struggling to find another one. So, and it looks like, let's see, I think they're accepting them pretty frequently. So I don't think this would take too long. Looks like they've merged a bunch yesterday. They've been merging some today. I don't want to single anybody out on these invalid ones or rejected ones, but if you want to see what not to do, check out these invalid ones.
Right. So, I looked at those off stream just in case they were, code of conduct type problems, but I think they were just not following the rules. So definitely check out the contributing guidelines and follow them. So if they say to do it in a certain way, you need to do that.
That's very important. And I believe this one may have a contributing file that teaches you. Okay, maybe not. Oh, here we go. It's right here in the README. To contribute a haiku to this repository, read about submitting a pull request in DigitalOcean's tutorial, how to create a pull request on GitHub, and then compose what a haiku in Markdown. So they have everything outlined here in the contributing portion of the README. So check that out because it's just good practice to always read guidelines on contributing. And then it's just better to familiarize yourself with that and make yourself more comfortable with open source because open source is just a great skill to have. And it's one of those skills, especially once you get out there in the market, working wherever you end up working or doing whatever, if you're doing like dev shop work, being able to jump into a repo and quickly understand that repo is a great skill. And Hacktoberfest is one of those things that you can do that with. So
I think even separate from open source, like just working with a dev team, there's sort of like sometimes unwritten rules about how the PR process might work and just kind of figuring that out as you go and sort of understanding the etiquette of like, okay, what is your team expecting? How big or small should the PRs be? How much documentation, testing, all that. I think this is a good way to kind of learn how that works.
Yeah, because experienced devs sometimes take things that they know for granted. So they won't teach you until they realize that you don't know it. And that's what a great way to do it is by doing it a pull request and learning that stuff. So
while you're sharing your screen, do you want to show the other stuff that you were talking about or do you have something else?
Sure. I can show you some other things. I do have my other pull requests up here. Here on my Hacktoberfest profile, I'm waiting for everything to mature. I have not gone above and beyond yet. I'm really tempted to do a few more PRs because I want to win a coffee mug. I like free stuff. So yeah, that's part of it. I think it's fun. Plus, I think having a Hacktoberfest shirt is really cool. So, but yeah, the reason they're maturing this year, I believe, is because of some of the issues from last year where people were doing bad PRs where they were just adding an extra space. So I think that's why they're doing maturing. But I'll show you all some PRs I did. I'll show you what I did for freeCodeCamp. Oh, it hides my pull requests. Okay. So you all can see all my pull requests. They're not very fun. Let's see. Can I actually see this? So this is one I did for freeCodeCamp. We talk about this one a lot, but it's still good to see how you can do it. It's basically you're just adding yourself to the game. So I added myself. There's a little, you can practice JavaScript objects, adding yourself, first name, last name, Cal Corbin. I also, in that process, decided to get another count towards my contribution by adding some documentation to our Techlahomas to tell people how to do it if they maybe missed it in the Slack channel. But this was actually a really fun way to practice my GitHub Markdown. So I added an explanation of how you can add yourself to the game and kind of talked about how JavaScript objects work and how you can do that. And I had a great time looking at the development setup. So if you wanted to see how it looked locally, once you added yourself, you can actually set up and see locally what the who's game looked like. So I added that to the documentation. I also added some doc strings, which are just like documentation for functions. I added that just because I just wanted to add a lot there, make sure, it was a good PR, but I think you don't need to do as much as I did on this one. I think I was just nervous and really
that kind of was a lot, but I'm so glad you did it because that was really helpful. When I first created this game, I kind of just threw it together and not really thinking about like, how do you actually work with this and do this, and no real good commenting at all. And also I really appreciate the, like, how do I test this? Because we have gotten a couple of PRs like, did you even test whether your changes worked locally? Mm-hmm. Because they don't. So that's a really good thing to consider, is like, make sure it looks good on your screen. Make sure it works on your machine before creating the PR.
So you can say that classic line of "it worked locally for me."
Right.
So
works on my machine.
And this is just good practice too, because knowing how to set up a local repo is its own, skill. So, and this one is, I was so happy to see that I could just click the index.html file and open it and see my changes. So that's all in there. And what's fun is you get to see what Markdown looks like after you merge it, and GitHub makes it look so pretty. And this is one of the features I've been adding, or I added for somebody, because especially with long README files, being able to click to what you want to read is so useful. So I can just be like, boom, take me to dev setup, which is actually what I did for this repo. And this is how I got to know these guys initially, is like, hey, can I just add, oh, that's not the main repo. Can I just add some table of contents, like skipping around, because they had monstrously huge documentation and navigating it was not fun. Let's see if this is the right README. They have so many repos. We're just going to find that pull request. I've also, one thing that's been nice about Hacktoberfest is I'm getting better at using GitHub, because GitHub can be kind of tricky to navigate sometimes. Maybe that's just me, but I'm always in like my little repo I'm working on, so not hopping around trying to find other repos. So let's see. Yeah, add table of contents to README. Here we go. So I added a table of contents to this README because it is a gigantic README. It's their documentation repo. So this is nice because they had a lot of documentation here. So it was nice to be able to just hop in there. They were very, very happy that I added it. I was surprised because I thought, oh, I'm just doing a table of contents. We'll see if they even consider it. They were thrilled. And then what was nice about that is they were like, hey, you want to come talk in our Slack? And I did. So I hopped into their Slack down here. And that's where they asked me to work on this JavaScript project, because they're like, what's your preference? Because they had Pact Foundation is a type of end-to-end testing. It's contract testing, which is something I'm still kind of learning, but kind of just an automated testing system. We don't have to get too deep into that. But ended up getting into a very monstrous PR. I think this is kind of why I stopped at 4 pull requests because I got really tired after this one because I did a lot of debugging. As you can see, there are a lot of comments on here. And these guys are all in Australia, so we were working on very different schedules. But this was a fun one. I updated all their example documentations in Node scripts. So in JavaScript, that's just kind of scripts to run to make sure your test still works. So basically, I updated their test scripts for them. So may look intimidating, but it was in a language that I'm comfortable with. So I was able to hop in there and do that. It was fun. And one of the only times that I've been told, yes, please commit passwords to the public repo. So, because I was really nervous about it. And they were like, no, it's okay. You can post the password. So that was fun. But yeah, it was fun. I got to know these guys. They are still, we're still chatting on Slack. Honestly, I'm probably going to do some more for them because I enjoy testing code, and I'm very curious about contract testing because it is a new concept I'm not familiar with. So I learned something. I met some people in Australia. It was fun. And my fourth contribution kind of wore me out. So yeah.
Well, that's awesome. It sounds like you really learned a lot.
I did. It was fun. Testing code that you've never run before for people that you can't talk to in person was very tricky, but we got it done. So good learning experience.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing all that with us. Anything else you want to share, Keith, Chris? Keith, you're talking, but we don't hear you.
Okay, sorry, it didn't show me muted. That's similar to the experience I had a few years ago. I had a similar thing, Cal, is that I worked with a company, or yeah, well, it's a company that was doing a UI library in Vue, and it was kind of they were wanting to be a competitor to Vuetify, which is the main UI library for Vue. And they were completely tied to one icon library. And so there were like 10 or 15 issues opened. Hey, can you add support for this library or that library or, whatever, right? Feather or Bootstrap icons or Font Awesome, And I went through and genericized their icon support and made it where you could add almost any icon library. There's a couple out there that use fairly non-standard ways to add icons that were one-off. I considered one-offs that didn't weren't easily supported. But I made that huge PR, and then they had actually made me a core contributor to the ecosystem. And I spent a year and a half as one of the core contributors for that system, doing PRs and keeping it up to date. Great group of guys, but they're in Spain. So not only do we have a bit of a time difference, not quite as drastic as Australia, but we also had quite a bit of language barrier too.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. It's a great way to get involved, like y'all did with people all over the world.
Yeah, that sounds like a great contribution too, because only being able to use one icon system sounds pretty frustrating.